Mualani's biggest pros and cons. That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice and let's get into it. First off, we gotta talk about how insane Mualani is as a Hydro DPS. I believe that she's gonna be an absolute powerhouse of a DPS unit. Her competition is pretty rough with the likes of Neuvillette running around, right? Well, his specialty is AOE, while being able to do well in single target, whereas Mualani is the opposite. She's incredible in single target, while still packing quite a solid punch in AOE. Mualani's got the potential to become one of Genshin Impact's biggest single-target behemoths, and considering how boss-heavy the Spiral Abyss is, this is very useful. Not to mention how Mualani is most likely simply going to do a crap ton of DPS. At the end of the day, Genshin's hardest challenge is a race against the clock, so big numbers equals a clean 36-star clear, which equals big happy. Mualani's playstyle is also very unique to her, as the closest thing we have to a Hydro DPS that specializes in vape nukes is Child. And even then, that isn't the core of his main gimmick, whereas for Mualani, it is. Also, I want to highlight how unique her playstyle is. Yeah, I know that's not necessarily related to your DPS, but the closest thing to Mualani's playstyle is C6 Vape Farina, and as someone with a C6 Farina, trust me, it's fun. Her archetype is also something only accessible to her, at least assuming a C0 5-star. Burnvape. No other DPS will probably be able to Burnvape nearly as well as Mualani does, granting her a unique archetype to utilize. No other Hydro DPS benefits from Burnvaping the way that she does. And even if you play a more traditional regular Vape Mualani, you'll surely be impressed with your numbers. You have plenty of creative ways to play her at your disposal. Speaking of which, Mualani has numerous unique teammates that she can use to the best of her ability, and when I say unique, Candace anyone? Dia anyone? Xinyan anyone? Yes, literal Xinyan. Anyways, Mualani's teams are extremely unique for a Hydro DPS. She doesn't go by the status quo. Her Burnvape teams can utilize Emily, for example, solidifying my previous case of Emily being a very important future core for all Notlon units. This will be very nice for Mualani's multi-wave. Yet if you didn't pull for Emily, fret not. Nahita's here to save the day, since she keeps burning up time up beautifully. The EM buff that she provides via her A1 is gonna be great for beefing up Mualani's vapes. And at last, finally, Dia can work well on a Burgeon team. Took her long enough to gain a competent synergy, so for all you Dia simps out there, Mualani's got one big pro for you all. She actually utilizes the character well. Not to mention how the brand new Natlan artifact set, Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, is geared towards supportive capabilities. Dia is also gonna be free from the standard 5-star selector. Still can't believe it's an actual thing, dude. So everyone has the potential to try out Dia this time around. And the fact that Xinyan is an actually competent free-to-play pyro option is absurd. You have to believe me that when I joked about Xinyan ever getting a buff, I literally did not think in the slightest that this would be the case. Yet here we are, lads, existing in a timeline in which Xinyan has an actual unironic use case. Sure, Mavu Ika will probably replace her immediately, but let's let Xinyan have her 2 to 3 patches of fame. Flabbergasted that this is an honest synergy. Not to mention Candace as well, who buffs normal attack damage. She's been getting better in the meta recently, considering Arlecchino Candace AOE Vape is actually a thing, and now her normal attack buffs work with Mualani too. Though we encounter a C6 Bennett dichotomy here. Don't C6 your Candace if you haven't already, as it'll give your Candace much more consistent Hydro procs, ruining enemy pyro application which screws up Mualani's own vapes. So C5 and under if you want your Mualani to shine with this Lady of the Desert. Mona is viable too. Her Omen buff is extremely chunky, and even if it doesn't last as long as Mualani's entire DPS duration, it buffing up even just 1 packs quite a punch, which is pretty nice considering how Mona's been falling off quite a bit in recent times. Yes, Mualani can obviously use more traditional teammates like Zhongli, Xiangling, Kazuha, etc, but I wanted to highlight the more unique synergies that this surfer has to showcase just how varied her team options are, like a well-balanced diet. With that being said, Mualani is very free-to-play friendly. The new upcoming craftable catalyst is going to be very solid for her, and she has numerous 4-star teammates which are highly accessible that will allow her to perform decently well. Even Xiangling plus the catch is free, so there's no excuses, but since Xiangling's an ER solar panel in this team, you'll be using Favonius anyway. So as a free-to-play, you can feel very safe investing your Primogems into Mualani. Not to mention how the limited 5-star characters she uses are already very flexible, such as Nahida and Zhongli, and because she's the very first Notland 5-star to come out, her peak shelf life is bound to last for at least a year after release, which is plenty enough time for a free-to-play to enjoy her. Mualani is also very mobile. I'm somebody who really appreciates good mobility in a unit. Pros and cons are oftentimes focused on the viability of a character in terms of the meta, but with exploration this good, I really wanted to take a moment to say how fantastic it is. I have the pleasure of owning a C2 Xianyan, so I can say for certain that exploration quality of life is something that goes severely unnoticed sometimes. Plus, even outside of the overworld, Mualani's got some of the most movement-intensive combat in the game, giving her an extremely fresh edge when it comes to having fun. And while she is indeed amazing for free-to-plays, Mualani also has incredible Primogem-based investment for all you longer-term players. Her constellations are absolutely nothing to scoff at, and her signature weapon is also extremely impressive. Considering that the weapon banner is no longer going to have us sobbing on the floor, at least not as much as before, this is actually something worth considering. It's also worth noting that Mualani has all these positive traits going for her before Mavuika. Now imagine how crazy Mualani is going to be after the Pyro Archon comes out. With that being said, add some constellations and maybe even the signature weapon of the Pyro Archon, whatever those may end up being, and Mualani's teams are going to see a massive uptick. Meaning that the Primogem investment potential of her teams is already huge, but could improve vastly in the future with Mavuika's inception into the game. The only situation in which this would not be the case is if Mavuika was a dedicated on-field DPS, and her cons plus weapon are self-serving like Raiden C2, as in does not provide any team-wide buffing. But considering how insane Varina's whole constellation lineup is, and how good Nahida C2 is for Dendro teams, I think we can all agree that support-based Archons, I'm sorry, anyways, you get the point, have a ton of potential at hand. So for those of you who have Primogems to spend, Mualani's cons and weapon are certainly a good choice of investment, as the increases are certainly there. Alas, as insane as Mualani is, she still has some cons to her which are worth considering. Because she's so amazing, you can consider these more as nitpicks than anything else. With that being said, something that nuking characters suffer from quite a bit is overkill, especially in multi-wave. You use up all your damage to defeat enemies that would have died with half the Genshin impact of your hit, and are left with no damage to defeat the next enemy waves. This is why Navia having 2 nuke charges is so good, because she can partition out her front load between enemy waves. So Mualani suffers from this. It isn't an absolute deal breaker, but it's still an inconvenience present among nuke-based DPSs that's worth noting. This con is more of an external thing, which might not matter to some of you at all, but we already have so many decent 5-star Hydro characters which negate the need for Mualani. But Imaginarium Theater juice? Let me just list all the staple Hydro units that we have. Farina, Yulan, Xingqiu, and then some other strong Hydros, Neuvillette, Child. Also, if Hydro is in a season, that doesn't suddenly mean all your characters have to be Hydro DPSs. Plus, the friend borrowing exists. I'm also a firm believer that you shouldn't pull limited 5 stars specifically for Imaginarium Theater. But the 2 new stages they're adding which are of heightened difficulty may change my stance on that. We'll have to wait and see how difficult those 2 stages actually are. But in terms of the Abyss, we have more than enough Hydros to clear with. Not to mention that Mualani is a DPS, not a support, so she isn't the kind of Hydro that you can slap into any team in order to get them rumbling. To be honest, I do consider this kind of a non-issue. More Imaginarium units are pretty nice at the end of the day, and Mualani's kit is different enough from all of her Hydro units in order to make her feel worth pulling for on her own. But if you already have plenty of well-built Hydros, there is seriously no need for Mualani. For as much crap as I give somebody like Ayato, for example, dude is still clearing endgame content just fine at the end of the day, despite being a low-tier unit. The nitpicking continues, as once again, take this point with a grain of salt. Mualani is not a single target locked as you may think. Sure, she does less damage with the more enemies that she marks, but with that being said, it separates one large nuke, splitting into a solid amount of DPS for each enemy that you attack. In an ideal world, she'd do single target levels of DPS to every enemy that she marks, which is why I'm considering this as a con. Yet this should be far from a deal breaker, as Mualani's DPS will still be very solid on the whole. Mualani is looking to be quite the exciting Nautilon release. Very impressive kit for the first unit that we'll be getting, keeping in trend with Linny, who was also a very powerful initial release when a new region came out. I'm very happy with how her kit turned out, and I appreciate all that Burnvape potential she's got going. If you want me to be genuinely honest, I'm way more excited for Kinich. The simp within me has infinitely more interest for the edgy Dendroman, and Mualani's design is just alright in my opinion. If this were a restaurant, Mualani is my Natlan starter, and Kinich is the absolute main course, and Movu Ika shall be my dessert. In any case, her crazy exploration is reason enough for me to be interested in pulling for her, and Mualani's main appeal is absolutely Burnvape plus how strong she looks. Can't wait for her to give my Emily a new use case, and maybe I should unironically dust off my Ignore, Dia, Shinyan, and Candace. Plenty of farming for me to get done. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Mualani's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice signing out, and Mualani is a water type gym leader, and Mega Sharpedo is her ace.